always been comfortable talking to me about the human body. Sex was always a topic she wanted me to be extremely comfortable with. When I hit puberty, she said, "I'm not dumb. You're gonna have sex before you're married. Please just use a condom." I got the talk when I was 8. We were in the car on the way to dance. I sat in the back behind the driver's seat. There was some information building up to the serious part, and then she said, "Okay, are you ready for this?" I said, "Yes." Like, "Yeah, I guess. What's the big deal?" And she said, "A man puts his penis in a woman's vagina." And I was just kind of sitting there nodding silently like, okay, cool. Meanwhile, my little 8-year-old brain is thinking, wow, I can't believe human adults just do a hot dog and babies happen. 2 years later, I saw porn for the first time and I was like, oh, that's not a hot dog situation. Then we started getting into menstrual territory. I'm literally so grateful for her enthusiastic celebration of tampons. From the get-go, she was like, tampons will save your life, they are so amazing, you're gonna wanna use them, pads suck. So I was a tampon kid. I got my period for the first time in 6th grade at dance the night before a competition. I went to the bathroom and I saw my tights, so I panicked and asked my dance teacher if I could go call my mom because it was an emergency. "Mom, I think I got my period." "What? Are you sure?" "I think so." "What's it look like?" "Brown." "Is it a lot?" "No." "Okay, I'll look when you get home, go back to class." That night, she took one look at my tights, paused, and goes, "You got your period." I love this sigh. That sigh is so goddamn funny to me because she was a nurse and always made sure I knew this is all very natural and the human body is so cool. But she also has a vagina and knows periods fucking suck. She showed me how to use a tampon by turning the sink on and putting one in the water. She wanted to make sure I could see how it expanded to soak up blood. That's truly one of the most beautiful images in my memory. The cotton bloomed like a flower. When I was 16, I was terrified of sex, so I decided to lose my virginity. I didn't want it to be all scary and intimidating with someone I loved, so I figured, get the bad sex out of the way with someone who I trusted but didn't care about in that way. It'd be like a science class. So I started having sex with my best friend at the time. I was so giddy and proud of myself, and I wanted to tell my mom, but it was a recurring thing, and I didn't know how she'd feel having the knowledge of her daughter having casual sex while it was happening. So I didn't tell her until we stopped. My mom always scheduled Rachel's and my checkups at the same time, and we'd all go together, and my mom would sit in the room with us so she could talk to the doctor for us. When I was 15 was when she finally said, "So you're getting older. I totally understand if you don't want me in the room anymore, especially when she asks you questions." At that point, I hadn't had a drop of alcohol in me, or a peen for that matter, so I didn't really give a fuck. But the next year, I was like, hey, maybe you don't come in with me. And I totally expected her to be like, yeah, no problem, privacy. But it was more like, what? Why? Did something happen? Is there a reason you don't want me in there? Stage direction. What the fuck, Mom? The appointment comes and goes, and on the car ride back, Jen's asking questions like a maniac, all concerned that I drank and I wasn't comfortable telling her, or that I had sex and I wasn't comfortable telling her. I think that's why she freaked out so much. I think the point of letting me know I didn't have to tell her things would make me want to tell her things. Which is smart. It worked. So we get home, and I'm like, Mother, let's take a walk. Let's sit outside. Let's have a chat. We sit on the back patio and start talking. I say, Mom, I'm not a virgin. I tell her who. When? April to July. When did you find the time, though? Remember when I told you I was going to see Zootopia? Or when I was studying for the AP Calc test? Yeah, that's not what I was doing. Okay. Where? His house. That wasn't a total lie, but I didn't have the heart to tell her it was usually a car. I have to hand it to her. She took the whole thing quite well. I am extremely stubborn, and loud, and temperamental. I get it from my mom. So Jen had no problem sending me to New York for college. Moving out of my house was the absolute best thing for our relationship. Because we weren't around each other all the time, we had no reason to fight. I actually wanted to call her and tell her about classes and projects. It took getting to school and hearing about the rules that other people grew up with and the power dynamics in other houses for me to realize that I was closer to my mom than a lot of girls are to theirs, despite being under the impression that I hated her. And despite being geographically far apart for the first time, we were closer than ever. Then she got diagnosed with breast cancer. That year, her mammogram was irregular, so in August she had a biopsy where they take a chunk of cells and test them for cancer. The results came back saying she had hormone-positive DCIS, which means it wasn't a solid tumor, but looks more like salt in the milk ducts. It was supposed to be contained. In September, she had a lumpectomy where they take 2 millimeters of tissue out around the entirety of the bad area, but she had too many little bits of cancer that were just spread out all over the place. So in November, she had a bilateral mastectomy, which means you take out both breasts. The doctors advised her to take out a chunk of lymph to see if the cancer spread to her lymph nodes, and despite the fact that everything looked normal according to multiple doctors, and even though there was nothing invasive found in the actual breast tissue, they found that the cancer spread to her lymph system. That is unheard of for DCIS. She went from stage 0 to stage 2A just like that. By January 2018, she was in chemotherapy. She didn't want to see a single strand of hair fall out, so she decided to shave her head before chemo started. It's really strange to see her mom bald. She never wore the wig we picked out together. She said it was too itchy, and she wasn't embarrassed, so she just wore a hat when she went out, and nothing at home. Her scalp was peach fuzzy. She wasn't allowed to exercise the way she used to. She started walking and doing yoga as much as she could, but she wasn't allowed to do high-impact stuff. She was miserable and weak. I'd never seen her be so not herself. Pain exists because our brains tell our bodies that something is wrong. It is a reminder that we are not indestructible. It is a reminder that we are human. It wasn't until the July trip, a full year after chemo ended, that I felt like my mom was back. She was keeping up with me and had lots of energy. Her hair was growing in auburn, so she was a redhead again. It was the strongest I'd seen her since I was in high school. During the trip, she told me she was excited to come visit me at school in the fall, which she did, many times. She was making up for all the lost time. The next part of the story takes place this past fall. I would like to take a second to acknowledge that I will be talking about eating disorders and eating disorder symptoms. If this content is unsafe for you, you are more than welcome to exit the space now or at any point. Please know that I am safe up here, and you taking care of yourselves will not be disruptive in the slightest. This past October, I had a panic attack that made me feel like I was a teenager again. For hours, I was convinced that my body was that of a child. Small, soft, virginal. For days after, I felt like 14-year-old me walking around in 20-year-old me's body. I was severely anxious, and for the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and deeply hated everything I saw. I felt violent. I wanted to carve myself like meat. I wanted to slice off every inch of fatty flesh. This thing I saw in the mirror was disrupting my perfectionism, my type A need to have everything exactly as I wanted it. I wanted it to be in my control. So I stopped eating. This time, unlike in high school, a voice in my head controlled every second of my day, every move I made, every emotion I felt. An eating disorder. Within 2 weeks, I got down to less than 300 calories a day, I lost over 10 pounds, and I shaved an inch off my waist. It was the first time I didn't have to think about holding my stomach in. It was just in. My days were consumed with thoughts of food and flavors, but the sensation of being light, of walking down the street and floating, outweighed those thoughts. After 3 weeks, I couldn't take it, so I told a therapist. That day became the current worst day of my life. I begrudgingly started eating again. I got a nutritionist. I got a regular therapist I could see weekly. For a month, each bite of food I took made me feel weighted to the ground, bloated, heavy, like I was about to burst. By December, I had gotten to the point of no longer having the drive to starve myself, but the thought crossed my mind every time I looked in the mirror. I missed seeing my rib cage. I missed feeling empty. I missed going to the gym 7 days a week. My voice and that other voice were at war, and I just wished one of them would win. When you exercise, you're creating a microscopic injury. That injury then heals itself and comes back stronger. Endorphins act as morphine and make the pain bearable. I missed my morphine. In the midst of it all, it was impossible to differentiate between pain and pleasure. Not eating felt good, and eating felt bad. At the time, I was angry at my body for doing what it was supposed to, which is storing fat. I'm working on loving my body for that. Some days, the voices in my head still fight, but now I always want the eating disorder to lose. I'm angry that my body told me it wanted to starve, it wanted me to hurt it, when in actuality, it was in desperate need of care. Why was my body rejecting how it was supposed to be nurtured? Why was it craving the torture I put it through? On that worst day of my life back in October, I called my mom and told her what I was doing to myself. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Please eat. You need to eat. Why aren't you eating? Because I hate my body. Please don't hate your body. You are beautiful. You're so pretty and beautiful. Please don't hate your body. I've gotten used to the sound of my mom's voice on the other side of a phone call, but during this conversation, her voice was the most delicate I've ever heard it in my entire life. I think a lot about a woman named Jennifer Carol Ward. She's never been pregnant. She's never had cancer. Her house was a female-dominant house. She grew up in gymnastics. She loved her sport and loved her friends. She hated the competition of weekly weigh-ins. When she was a teenager, her mom was strict, so she wasn't allowed to get a second ear piercing. She locked herself in the bathroom with her best friend and they pierced each other's ears. Her senior year of high school, she went to Planned Parenthood and got herself birth control. When she got to college, it was the first time she wasn't regularly involved in a sport and she could eat whatever she wanted. She gained some weight. She didn't like the weight. She started to eat healthier and exercise regularly. And that was it. It worked for her. Jen was more concerned with having a baby than being married, so she totally would have had one on her own. But lucky for us, in 1996, at 27 years old, she met a man named Jeffrey who worked in the pre-formulation department at work. A few months later, they started dating. 6 months into their relationship, Jeff proposed and she said yes. 6 months! How many fucking times did Jen Gazzara tell her children not to get married too early? Oh, that only applies to age, not span of relationship? Was she a romantic or something in her 20s? When I was little, I thought my mom was unfeeling. I saw her cry twice my entire childhood. Since her diagnosis, I've lost count of how many times she's cried in front of us. Sometimes she cries when she's scared of dying. Sometimes she cries when she's angry. She feels a lot. There is a part of the brain called the insular region. It controls the intensity at which you feel an emotion. It does not matter which emotion, just how strongly you feel it. Circumstance dictates when you feel positively or negatively about something or someone. That is why love and hate are so tethered. Positive or negative, you care. Stage direction. The Best Day by Taylor Swift plays again. Projections. Loving my mom and loving my body and hating both of those things. In July of 2019, after 3 days of my mother being in New York, it was time for her to go home. We rushed up to Penn Station and got there only a few minutes before her train boarded. We waited in the yellow NJ Transit room, her holding her duffel and me holding my leftovers from breakfast. In 3 days, we hadn't had a single fight, the longest we'd ever gone. We had more fun than I expected. It was obvious that she was trying to connect with me through my world. Come from away, the Met, Hudson River Park. I saw a woman from Philadelphia at home in a city. When she was diagnosed, I knew I loved her, but this was the first time I liked and understood the person she is. The track number popped up on the screen. And a swarm of people moved forward. All right, I'll see you in a couple weeks. She hugged me. I reciprocated the gesture to the best of my ability. See you then. Love you. Love you. She moved forward into the crowd of people. I turned towards the stairs and started walking away. I'm a person that looks back. I always have been. I'm always terrified it'll be the last time I ever see someone. I got halfway up the steps and turned back to look at my mom in the crowd. Then I started crying. I didn't feel like I said goodbye. I was so ready for this person I got along with to leave. I ran down the steps and pushed past a handful of people before tapping her on the shoulder. She turned around, saw me, and laughed a little bit. I hugged her for real. Stage direction. Julia hugs her tight. Her arms slowly wrap around herself. She lets go. Okay, I'm good now. Bye. Love you. I love you too. I went back to the steps and watched her disappear through the doors and down the escalators. Then I left. Before I was even out of the train station, I pulled out my phone to text her because I still wasn't sure if she knew. Stage direction. Projection. I love you. End of play. So that's a play I wrote and worked on.
You okay?
I love you. Turn it off. Yeah.